Conversations with the Mind podcast, where we explore consciousness through conversations with interesting people. Our mission is to engage the collective mind piece by piece to bring greater clarity of mind to our listeners locally and across the planet, and to contribute to broaden the shared experiential knowledge and wisdom of existence. What's up, YouTube?
Hey YouTube, how you doing today?
Alright folks, welcome back to Conversations with the Mind. I'm your host as always, Shane Lamaster. We are here for episode number 65 with a very special guest, Dr. Dustin Dippen. How are you, sir?
Good, thank you for having me.
Do I say your last name correctly? Dippen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Skinny Dippin' Dots.
Okay. I like that. That's nice. People mess up my last name all the time.
How do you say it?
I say Lamaster, like it's spelled. It's not spelled how you say it, right? It's spelled like you say, like Lee Master, but it's La Master.
Right. I thought maybe it would try to be like French, like Le Master.
Right, and my whole life I thought it was a French name. I found out last year it's not. It's actually an Irish name.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. So. Anyway.
Is it with an apostrophe initially?
No.
No, has always been the one.
Yeah, as far as I know. Anyway, so the first question is always the same. I ask all my guests the same question, and that is the podcast is called Conversations with the Mind. So what does that phrase mean to you as you hear it? How does it land with you? What comes up for you visually, linguistically? Conversations with the mind.
Right. So I have this experience sometimes, especially in more of a psychedelic mindset, in which I feel like I'm actually listening to someone's consciousness as it evolves actively, and the words become less important than trying to understand the concepts, because the person really seems like they're trying to get to something. It's like the raw will of the spirit is moving forward and trying to express itself. And to me, that's a conversation with the mind, where, you know, people talk all the time, and we use words, and we have things that we're supposed to say to each other in socially polite conversations, and we have facial expressions and all these things that are communication, but often they're put there for reasons that don't necessarily involve directly communicating how we're thinking or feeling on a deep level. And I think conversations with the mind, in my estimation, would be when you're at that point where you're really, really trying to communicate, almost like someone who doesn't really speak a foreign language, but they're trying to get an idea across because they really, really need that thing they're trying to communicate. And when we do speak the same language, and we're trying to talk about something that's difficult to articulate, that's just at the edge of our consciousness, like that to me is the mind conversating. You know, that's the important stuff. It doesn't happen in our everyday life.
Right on the verge, like right on the edge. Like as you're describing it, I feel like I felt that feeling for sure, where you're like, you know, you're right on the edge and you're pushing the limits just enough, you know, not so far that you're getting lost. But yeah, I like that a lot, because a lot of what we just in normal conversation throughout the day, like I don't get much feeling attached to those surface level conversations, right? But when you're right, like when we reach that nexus point and you are around certain people, or you're in a certain mindset, you can start to connect the emotion to the words, you know, and bring that emotion forward a little bit better. That's awesome.
Yeah, and it's like, I feel like when someone, you know, in the past it would have called this speaking from the heart. Like you can tell when everybody around someone gets quiet and they're really listening while someone else is trying to articulate a complex and difficult and heartfelt idea, because it's like we intuitively know as human beings, like this is really important. Like something's going to come out that matters. You know, it's not like we're talking over each other or interrupting or can't wait to speak, or, you know, holding back what we're going to say until the other person stops speaking. It's like for a moment, like everything kind of ceases and everyone hones in on this vibrational sense, this resonance, this, I don't know if it's a tone of voice or something energetic that we feel in our body, but there's something that's different about that kind of communication.
I noticed that today too, you know, when we were doing our thing at the Wholeness Center. You know, someone would say something, you know, in the big group interaction, someone would say something, and there might be some side conversations, but they would stop immediately. Everyone would just turn, not because the person demanded some attention or respect or anything, but because it was like this feeling of like, oh, something's being said that I have to hear, and if I miss out on it, then, you know, I'm going to be behind the curve a little bit. Yeah. So I want to get into that. Thank you, by the way, for your rendition on Conversations with the Mind. But yeah, I want to talk about what we did today too over at Prati, which is the Psychedelic Research and Training Institute here in Fort Collins, Colorado. Dustin and I have been working with a great group of people to try and bring about our contribution to this psychedelic renaissance that is happening. It's very real right now, and we want to become leaders in this emerging or re-emerging of medicine work. And so today we were all at the Wholeness Center, and you described it the best. The way when I asked you what how do we conceptualize what we did this morning, the way you said it, I think sounded the best. So how did you say it? You remember?
Well, yeah, from a conventional standpoint, as a group of people, we had a group psychotherapy process. We were all evaluated medically to ensure that we were appropriate candidates for ketamine therapy. We took a low-dose psycholytic oral dosage of pharmaceutical ketamine, as was prescribed and administered to us by physicians, which helped us really, as a group, to facilitate small group discussion and then later a larger group discussion to help us develop our values and essentially our rationale for gathering as a group, to develop things like our mission statement, our goals, our core values, the things that really bring us together and allow us to function and to decide which direction we'd like to take in this rather large developing context of, like you said, the psychedelic renaissance that seems to be happening right now, especially in this area of the country, but all over the world, really.
Yeah, and it was such a cool idea too, because I think we ripped the idea off of somebody else. Someone came to one of our meetings and told a story about how some ketamine group was using ketamine to facilitate group discussions, and we're like, oh, we should do that and help them, or have the medicine help inform the work that we're doing with the medicine, right? So have it emerge organically rather than trying to, fit it into a box or something.
Right, and which is so counterintuitive to how I was trained as a physician. I mean, as a psychiatrist, as a conventional psychiatric provider, if someone comes in and they have an illness, whether that's depression or psychosis, I would administer them a medication, but I wouldn't think about taking it myself unless I also had those symptoms. So, one of the things about psychedelics in general, and certainly ketamine can apply to this, is the notion that there may be the opportunity for us to open our minds and utilize ourselves in a way that we didn't previously understand. A way to suspend our own default mode network, if you want to talk about it in neuroscience terms, or our own ego or personality characteristics, to really allow this conversation with the mind to transpire. Get ourselves out of the way so that we can actually do the important conversation. I think was the goal and intent of today, and I think it actually worked out pretty well.
Oh, I think it worked great. I think the low dose, for the listeners out there who might not know, psychedelics can be used along a spectrum as far as, a lot of different things, dosage and setting and all these things, but at the lower doses, we call it psycholytic, right? Instead of a psychedelic experience, which is mind manifesting itself through these internal, I hate to use the word hallucinations because they're very real to you, but a psycholytic type therapy is a low dose where it just starts making the cognition better, right? The connections better, makes it more organic, more flow, like you said earlier.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we were going for today. And I don't know if anybody has coined the term within our group yet, but instead of brainstorming, K-storming. We did some K-storming today.
Yeah, we did.
And man, it was amazing. Just because Dr. Scott Shannon asked us to pay attention to, how does the group process change when you're on the medicine and when you're not on the medicine, right? Because we did group process before in a ordinary state of consciousness, and then we took the dosage, and then we got back together with the same group and did the same process again. And what were the differences? And Scott was really keyed into that, and I'm glad he asked us to pay attention to that, because I felt like it was informative for all of us anyway, right? We started throwing out ideas like, how we were using more visual descriptive words, right? In our breakout session after the dose, we were seeing things manifest in our mind and trying to explain it from that reference point, right? Almost like here, I'm trying to describe this 3D image to you of this thing that we're trying to build, versus beforehand it was just words.
Right.
It felt so much more, what's that word, substantive.
Yep. Yeah, and I want to give the listeners a little bit more context too, so they understand why we decided to do this. So as a Psychedelic Research and Training Institute, as our acronym name represents, we're attempting to develop ways in which we can facilitate the psychedelic process within psychotherapy. And one of the ways we're exploring that right now is group psychotherapy, because ketamine therapy can be quite expensive. There are places out there that charge $500 for a single infusion of ketamine. Often ketamine-assisted psychotherapy can be hundreds of dollars per session. So one of the things that we're exploring as a group is how can we get the cost of these sessions down so that we can really bring in people who have a wide range of neurotic illness and help them at a much lower price point. And so we're exploring, doing group oral administration of ketamine as a way of helping the group process things together, and thereby helping individuals come to a greater understanding of themselves, move beyond their sort of neurotic tendencies, their anxiety, their depression, their everyday life hang-ups that hold them back and make them feel poorly from a mental, spiritual, emotional level. And so they can really proceed through those things without having, $1,000 or $2,000 cash to throw down on a treatment.
Yeah, I've heard you say the phrase ketamine for the masses.
Yeah,
many times, right? But when I hear that, I mean, such a great sentiment. But to be completely honest with you, when I hear that, the image that comes to my mind is like hippie Tommy Chong driving this school bus down the road and being like, "Hey man, you guys having some mental issues? Come on up to the bus, and we got you covered,
Yeah. So I think if you can take that image and then think that Tommy Chong just went to psychotherapy school or medical school or whatever Tommy Chong did to get credentialed and appropriately trained, that is kind of how I feel like I am sometimes, or where I'd like to be.
Could that be real?
Kind of like a ketamine clinic for the people. So, I had a person recently tell me, I've done these psychedelics, I've had these experiences, and it's helped me to grow some, but what I'm really looking for right now is a professionally trained psychotherapist who can help me navigate this realm. And I think that is what's most exciting to me about this renaissance, if you want to call it that, what we're experiencing right now in the world, where people are getting more excited about psychedelic research in general, is that we have adults, grown-up people with degrees who are learned, who are now willing and able to apply what they know and utilize these drugs that previously were used in more recreational spaces. Although truly, if we look at the history, we're just repeating something that happened in the 50s, 60s, 70s with drugs like LSD or psilocybin or even MDMA that were previously studied and used in psychotherapeutic contexts. So this isn't a new thing. It's just that we're experiencing an opening again from a socioeconomic, from a legal standpoint. The DEA, the FDA, the society at large is more open to us being exposed to these things and exploring them and developing them as therapeutic tools as they had been used in the past. So it's interesting. It's like, for us this is new and exciting, but really it's been done before, and maybe, hopefully not, but maybe it will be done again, and this is just another cycle of that we're witnessing currently.
That vision that I had of the Tommy Chong bus driver, totally could be like a mobile unit. I'm wondering if that's even feasible, like having like an RV outfitted with a therapy room, psychiatrist, a therapist, a nurse practitioner on the RV at once, and they go to rural communities and be like, who's been depressed? Send your depressed people to me.
Well, sorry.
No, go for it. No.
to be totally transparent, this was something we'd actually been talking about since May, and not that we would just randomly show up like the further bus from Ken
Yeah.
Kesey's Merry Pranksters.
I'm thinking Magic School Bus, the TV show. Yeah.
Another way to look at a service like that is a dental van, or an MRI semi that might go around to rural clinics, and once a month they arrive so they can do your MRIs. Or, where I used to live in rural Vermont, there would be a dental van that went to all the rural communities to make sure that kids and adults in areas where there were not a lot of access, they could get the services they need.
Mm-hmm.
So if you did have an RV that was outfitted with 2 therapy rooms, and you had a prescriber and a couple of therapists that went along in this RV, you could go to communities on a regular basis. You could go up to Cheyenne, wherever you're medically licensed, you could go to these rural areas with your RV on a regular basis and have people book appointments online and actually see them in this mobile clinic space and provide services that wouldn't normally be provided in their community.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, this would be all above board, legally sanctioned, credentialed people doing this in an appropriate, medically supervised fashion. But we're living in an era where this is currently possible. I mean, this is something that could be done.
Yeah. Sorry, I think we're both getting burps from this.
Excuse me.
This soda
The
water.
bubblies.
Yeah, the bubbly is making me bubble. So Dustin, I wanted to have you on the show because you are. I haven't even known you for that long, just a couple months, but
Mm-hmm.
right away, like I was drawn to you, and I've been just fascinated with who you are as a person. And that doesn't happen very often to me. I meet and I talk to a lot of people, and most people just aren't that interesting to me. Most people are just, I will look around, and most people I see are stuck in their default mode network all day long, every day, monotonous, go to work, come home, everything's the same, complaints. And I know that they have the power to change what they perceive or what their life is like, but they don't take it, and so it's such a refreshing experience to meet someone like you that I'm like, tell me more. I want to know more about your background, and you told me a little bit about your background. I was hoping that you could share with me and the audience, whatever you're comfortable with, sort of what your upbringing was. You were talking before about your family and that sort of context that was there, but also your pathway through academia, through through to where you are now, and,
Mm-hmm.
and what landed you where you are now. I mean, your background is it's a wide spectrum
Mm-hmm.
of experience.
Yeah. Yeah. I used to say when I
Here,
was
come a little bit closer.
Oh,
No,
thank
you're
you.
fine.
So I used to say when I was applying for residencies to get trained as a psychiatrist that I never intended to become a doctor, and it was kind of a joke, but it was serious in that I really never sought out to be a physician. I come from a very humble background of people who are blue collar. They have their own business, my parents, and really rural area of Wisconsin, economically depressed, and grew up, thinking that country music and Bud Light and a lot of more kind of rednecky things were the way to be in life. And it wasn't until probably my teen years when I started to get exposed to psychedelic medicines that I really woke up to understanding the world was a much bigger place, and that the things that I valued and gave me purpose and that I'd been kind of taught were the cool things, or what I should be striving for as ideals, really didn't seem to have a lot of meaning, which was really disenchanting, because here I was kind of a popular kid, football team and class president and all these things, and they just all seemed so empty, which I think, somebody who doesn't understand psychedelics might look at that and think, well, gosh, that just really took a good kid and took him out of the flow. He was in all these things, and he got into drugs, and then he just didn't value them. And what it took me a few years to understand was that I really started to see other things in our world. I started to see ecology, I started to see sustainability, I started to see I could eat different things, I could act differently, I could think about the world differently, I could choose to read different sorts of things. I didn't have to watch TV all the time. I could take care of myself physically, and it was just such a transformative experience. But I think a lot of people who knew me back then looked at who I was as a person and thought, gosh, what happened to that guy? He used to be what everybody wanted to be. And it took...
Yeah, you were going with the status quo, and then all of a sudden found a different pathway, and they're like, what's wrong with you?
Right. You know,
Yeah.
like, you used to be really cool.
Yeah.
And gosh, now you...
Why would you give up the football for the drugs?
Right. And to be clear to our listeners, too, it's not that I gave up the football for heroin or crack
Sure.
or meth or anything like that. I mean, I had some early life LSD experiences and psilocybin, and they really just opened my mind to, gosh, there's a whole other world out there. And I remember I went to the Waukesha Library in Wisconsin, and there was like this bookshelf that was like 9 feet high, or maybe 8 feet, I don't know, and like 6 feet wide, and it was full of shamanic textbooks, all about, you know, indigenous experiences and hallucinogens and etc. And I thought, my context thus far for these drugs has been a DARE officer coming to my classroom and saying, these things are bad, your brain will be a cooked egg, and, you know, only bad, sort of trashy people would ever want to do these drugs, so stay away from them, otherwise you'll be imprisoned, or your body and your mind will disintegrate by using them. And suddenly I'm exposed to all these books written about how, you know, shamans use these to heal other people, and these deep mind spiritual experiences. And having had some of those experiences, I could start to relate to what was written in those books, and I realized that I'd utterly been lied to, and I really didn't know who actually knew the truth at that point. But I knew that I knew a little piece of it. And
Because you had experienced it, right?
Exactly. And that I also knew that the predominant culture in which I was manifesting, you know, where I was going to school and paying car insurance and having a job and having to pay taxes, that culture didn't seem to integrate or understand psychedelics, and if anything, they seemed fairly bent on destroying and eliminating their influence on the culture.
And primarily motivated out of fear, too, right?
Seemingly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that, and maybe just ignorance.
Yeah.
Because, you know, what I saw as well when I would go to underground parties at the age of 18 in Chicago, would be 4,000 people peacefully enjoying their lives under the influence of these substances that were highly illicit. And to think, gosh, everything I've been told about how, you know, horrible the outcomes would be if people expose themselves to these substances, this just isn't bearing out to reality. I was raised as a person who worked in a bar since the age of 14 serving drinks, and I saw people show up in the morning and drink themselves hard, and I knew people who died in car accidents and crashed their snowmobiles and, you know, go home and yell at their kids, and I saw people get in bar fights and fight over significant others and partners and have illicit affairs, and all this ignorance and violence that came from alcohol. I was so well associated with it that when I saw the impact of psychedelics and other drugs like that in a huge party scene, I thought, wow, why is this illegal and the conventional stuff is what's appropriate? And we could talk about that for another hour or two.
Sure.
You know, what that represents.
Huge disconnect there, too. And it's interesting, too, because Callie and I go to, like, concerts and stuff, and, you know, sometimes we'll take a little enhancer, you know, a little psychedelic enhancer for a concert, and it'll be nice. But we'll look around, and, it, you know, it depends on where you're at, right? If you're at the Pepsi Center, everyone's drinking, you know, Bud Light and cheap beer from their taps, right? And you can look around that when you're on a substance and look around at the people and see, really, you can see through, I guess, the facade that they're putting on and see, like, what the alcohol is doing to you. Like, I can see it, like, melting the skin off of your face. Like, I can see it creating wrinkles right now. I can see your face turning yellow as you're drinking and having a blast with this beer, right? But I go to like a festival or an electronic show or something where, you know, maybe there's not even any alcohol being served at all, right? It's all other illicit substances maybe, and there's none of that. You know, there's people. I look around and people will look healthy. You know, they won't look like they're toxifying. They look like they're healing and emerging, like, out of this cocoon, right? Rather than, I don't know. It's really interesting how alcohol is so prevalent in our society, and that one in particular is so deadly and so toxic compared to everything else.
Yeah, I mean, once again, this is a topic we could speak at for some time. I read something recently about alcohol being the 5th most addictive substance, you know, illicit substance or intoxicating substance, however you want to put it, that's on the planet. And if you look at the alcohol-related medical issues that arise, not to mention the socioeconomic issues, you know, so-and-so got in a fight or so-and-so slept with so-and-so or whatever, there's just a lot of bad things that arise from ethanol ingestion. And I'm not saying alcohol's bad. Trust me, I like craft beers. You know, I appreciate alcohol. I grew up with it, and I know what it is. It's just that being the one outlet for so many people, and it becoming a drug of abuse and having such evident consequences, you know, liver disease, diabetes, malnutrition, gastric illnesses, like just the fact that the alcohol itself, when it interacts with our tissues, does so much damage. You know, and I'm not saying other illicit drugs don't have those negative qualities. Certainly if you ingested them with the frequency people ingest alcohol, you'd still have a lot of issues. And I'm also not saying that all people that ingest Bud Light are you know, ignorant or bad, and that people who do other drugs are good. I think that all these substances have an upside and a downside, and they can create damage, and they can create good experiences and bonding experiences. I just wish in our culture there were more choices for people. I'm always astounded if you go to like Amsterdam and they have, you know, truffles for sale for people, and they have marijuana cafes, and it just seems okay.
And they have prostitution.
Yeah, and they have prostitution. And it's just...
No, but they make it an option, right? And
yeah, they do. Yeah.
And it takes away a lot of the criminality. It takes away a lot of the violence, the sexual violence that happens. It takes away all of that because it provides alternative outlets for people who need those outlets.
Exactly. And I remember one time I was in Amsterdam and I was smoking a joint on a parking structure, and this person that was from the Netherlands came up to me, and they were saying hi and just being social and cordial. We were talking a little bit. And it was evident to me that what I was doing wasn't really that appropriate to be smoking pot in public like that. They were accepting of it, although it really wasn't something they wanted to do either. And talking to local people, and once again, I don't speak for everyone in the Netherlands, but talking to local people when I was there, it became evident to me. I was like, well, yes, that's something that people can do here, much like I could go get a burrito, they could go smoke a joint if they wanted to. And, you know, back in 2002 or something, that was very novel, because obviously we didn't have marijuana legalization in the United States like we do now. But it had been integrated into their culture in such a way that young people weren't excited by it any longer. You know, they could go get a joint, but most people really chose not to. It was more for like tourists, or, you know, maybe you smoke weed, maybe you don't, but it's not really a big issue. You know, much like I think it's becoming more so this way in states where it's legal in the United States right now. You know, initially I just saw the release in Illinois, day one of marijuana sales, they sold $3.2 million worth of cannabis. You know, I mean, gosh, people in Illinois are so excited to buy cannabis. You know, I've been living in Colorado now for a couple months, and I think I've purchased cannabis one time. And maybe I'm an anomaly in that regard, but it's just kind of, it's not that exciting once you can just go get it, you know, and everyone has it. It's not like it may have been when I was a teenager, like, oh my gosh, you have weed, you know, it's just like, yeah, of course you do, like, I have salt in my cabinet, you have marijuana, okay, you know, let's move on.
Right, it's no longer a commodity.
Or an illicit commodity that you can't obtain, and it has to be really, you know, highly prized,
Yeah, I've been seeing posts recently too, like, imagine how, you know, the good that can come from people growing their own medicines. Right? You grow your own strains of cannabis, you grow your own strains of mushrooms, you grow your own strains of whatever. I think, you know, even like bee cultivators, right? Like those Himalayan bees that produce the psychedelic honey, right?
Oh, wow, I didn't know about that.
You didn't know about that? No, these bees make these giant honeycombs that are found on the edge of cliffs. And so the local people will get together in big groups, because they have to be able to hold the ladders and things, and they make these ladders out of bamboo and lower them down over the cliffs, and they've been doing it for generations, where they'll go down and they'll, you know, jab at the honeycomb and get it to fall, and the honey that's produced by the bees, I believe it's from the rhododendron flower in particular, they'll bring you back to the hive, and it becomes a psychedelic honey.
Wow. So
like 2 to 3 teaspoons or tablespoons, I don't know which dosage, but, you know, not that much, you know, can do that. And they talk more about it for like nootropic factors and stuff. Like most of the locals will put like 1 teaspoon in a day.
Microdosing.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so I think it's super important, this conversation that we're having around, what do these substances mean to us anymore? we had a big. It's like we had a snow globe, and then Prohibition came, and someone just shook it up, and now we're like, what do we do now?
Well, and I think it occurs to me to present here, why were they taken away? So, if, when I lived in Argentina, people would have their own yeast that they combined with grapes that they were growing themselves, and they would make wines. And they would, it was almost like every household would have their own wine, and you'd go and be like, hey, this is the wine that we made, or you'd go out to a winery and you'd taste their wine. And so, like you said, you could grow your own cannabis, you could grow your own psilocybin strains, or mushroom strains. Why has all this been taken off the table, as in most societies around the planet, especially sort of first world, modern societies? Of course, traditional societies, many of them had some of these plants as a part of their culture. But at some point, someone said, either a religious body or a legal body, no, we need to remove these. These are very dangerous. It's just...
it affects our bottom line, so we need to stop it.
So the financial aspect, right? Like maybe it interferes with the infrastructure that's put in place, the social infrastructure that feeds large corporate interest. So that's one interpretation. Another interpretation is it maybe threatens the predominant religious paradigm, the Judeo-Christian tradition. If you can have a direct experience of the divine, or you think you're having a direct experience of the divine, gosh, that's very threatening to someone who owns a church and has a book, and they're sitting up there on Sunday asking for your money.
Because then they'll no longer need the church. They'll no longer need the priest if they can have the experience themselves.
Right, and I think that, I just recently reheard Richard Nixon's proclamation when he decided to sign the I can't remember, the Controlled Substances Act, whatever it's called, when he was really feeling threatened by Timothy Leary and his movement.
Public enemy #1.
Exactly.
That speech.
Exactly, and admittedly at the time he was very provocative, Timothy Leary, in saying, hey kids, tune in, drop out. These kids are not going to fight your wars. They're not going to work in your corporate structures. All these things. And, I'm at this place now in my life where I'm like, well, why wouldn't we still fight for what we believe in? And why wouldn't we still want to be a part of business? Business is a way that we exchange our worth. I think the reality is, even if psychedelics came and overwhelmed our culture and all the first world nations across the planet, you'd still need to have business. You would still have conflicts, and people would still want to be aggressive towards one another. It's not like all these things would be eradicated and we would all just sit around naked with flowers singing. Maybe you might do that for a couple of hours or something, but then you'll go back to your life and realize you need to make sure no one's stealing your corn and you have food to eat for the winter. There's this adage that goes, what do you do before enlightenment? Do you chop wood and you carry water? What do you do during enlightenment? Well, you chop wood and you carry water. And then what do you do after enlightenment? Well, you chop wood and you carry water. And I think...
I love that one.
Yeah, and it's the same thing, psychedelic medicines and psychedelic psychotherapy sweeps across the planet. We're still going to need to chop wood and carry water. Maybe we won't really think about nuking one another, hopefully not, but we'll still have conflicts, and we'll still fight over resources, and we'll still be mad at each other, and we'll still have in-groups and out-groups. It's not like we'll all just dissolve into some murky together gooiness.
Yeah, it's not going to be some... I think that's any sort of fundamentalism, even on the woo-woo hippie side. You can be a fundamentalist hippie, right? And be totally into, that sort of no government, no business, completely
Anarchy.
free. Yeah, anarchy. And that's a reasonable idea to, I guess, entertain. And in some contexts, I think it would be beneficial. I think actually components of that, when integrated into current systems, could be really beneficial too. Like we were talking about, in our talk today, like the Bitcoin blockchain system, how they decentralize power for the banks and where money is stored. That gives the investor the power, right? They can check the record to make sure that things are legit, and there's no one person dictating it, right? I think that that can happen too with the psychedelic movement, and it's not just about psychedelics. Psychedelics are a tool. The bigger questions are about the thing that gets affected by the psychedelic, right? Our consciousness. So you're right. Even if there is widespread legalization, decriminalization, there's still going to be conflict. There's still going to be suffering, mental suffering, not just things like depression, but things like injustice, racism. I hate this group because of that. That's still going to exist. So we need to get deeper into what is this thing that we call consciousness, and how are we affecting each other in ways that we don't even know.
Right. Yeah. And I think, going back to what you were saying about going to a concert and seeing other people ingesting alcohol versus you may have a different state of mind, my experience is it's almost like a field effect, in that I remember so very clearly this experience, and I'll just say it's someone who isn't me who had this experience of sitting in a concert, being on high-dose psychedelics, crying, sitting on the grass, and around them a ring of about 5 or 10 feet of just open grass. And on the edges of that ring are people holding, beer cans and cups of alcohol, and looking kind of with some discontent or disconcertedness at the person in the middle, crying and sitting there in a meditative pose, taking in the music and the sound at the concert, while there were a couple people who appeared much like they may be on MDMA, sitting in this ring of openness on the grass, just really enjoying and basking in what seemed like sunlight or warmth that they were kind of taking in on a somatic level, on a body level. And so what seemed very confusing and maybe even a little bit like something they wanted to avoid to the people ingesting alcohol, to the people ingesting what seemed to be MDMA, it just seemed soothing. Like it was like, gosh, this is the energy we've been looking for. And the person in tears in a meditative pose staring at the concert looked to be in some degree of distress if we look at our everyday consciousness, but truly they were going through some sort of an awakening experience at the time. It's just that these drugs paint the world so differently, and that the predominant experiences with alcohol, and the way that people's lens of perception is through alcohol or sobriety, or maybe nicotine or caffeine if you want to throw it in there, it's so limited as a framework for understanding ourselves as mental, emotional, spiritual beings. And that's really what this comes down to. And as a psychiatrist, I'm in the business of providing SSRI medications, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or related medications for anxiety or depression. I'm in the business of providing antipsychotic medications if people have delusions or if they're hallucinating. I'm in the business of providing benzodiazepine medications, although I don't like to, when people are having panic or anxiety. And these all suppress symptoms. They make them go away. Where an alternative paradigm that seems to be developing, and has been developed in the past, it's not as though I've developed this or it's novel really in our time, is that these symptoms of anxiety, depression, psychosis are much like the leaves above ground, the expression of the root underneath, much like the carrot is what you actually want to get at, and the green leafy stuff on the top just tells you when the carrot's about ready. The anxiety, the depression, the psychosis, the bipolarity expressions that people have, mania, depression, that come out are maybe just manifestations of underlying conflicts that we don't have the tools to really dig up and understand and digest. So we simply try to cut off the leafy bits at the top or push them back down because they're disturbing to us. This is really a paradigm of mental health that some would say is extremely disturbing, and others would actually go so far as to say it's rather barbaric to simply say to others, well, let's suppress your symptoms and make them go away because, you need to be happy. You need to not have those symptoms.
Or, I see that, but I also see the side where people are pushing others towards the suppressive drug model because they're like, I can't deal with you the way you are.
Right.
So you need to go get on some kind of balancing medication.
Right.
Especially with kids too.
Right.
Like parents pushing their kids towards ADHD and stuff, medication when they're young. Like, you shouldn't even be diagnosing that for a kid. Like, let the kid run around the block a few times, They're just high energy. That's good.
The latest statistic I read was 13.6% of people in the United States meet criteria for ADHD. So it used to be, I can't remember, there's a Netflix documentary called Take Your Pills that quoted it at a lower level. I think it was 10%. But England, England has like 8%. Scandinavian countries have somewhere between 3 and 5%. Forgive me, I don't have the statistics in front of me. But the United States is exponentially higher than all other countries.
There's no reason for that to be unless it's a social construction.
Right.
People are creating this problem.
And so you get into the idea of the identified patient, which is something you just pointed out. It's like the child who has ADHD, hyperactivity, inattention, distractibility, anxiety symptoms, whatever it's manifesting, they're the problem. It's not necessarily the divorced, disconnected parents who are checking out with alcohol and don't like each other, or who were themselves traumatized and don't know how to connect with their children or each other or themselves, so they're creating some sort of disconnect and dysregulation in their children. Or not to put it all on the parents, maybe it's the media construction, or
or even just the interaction, the interaction between us and our phone and the frequencies and the screen time that we get. Right?
Yeah, there are definitely changes in our environment that are hard to quantify. Everybody's up in arms. Well, there's a certain portion of the population that's currently up in arms about the development of 5G and whether or not this will bring on, cancer or further psychiatric illness or physical illnesses or chronic inflammation, and some would say, oh, that's woo-woo crap, this is just another technology, and everyone was scared of electricity when it came out. And other people would say, no, we really need to take a hard look at how our technologies may be impacting our physiology, our energetic resonances, whatever those are, and however we're supposed to be measuring those, which I think a lot of conventional science essentially ignores.
Right.
And it's kind of,
So that's something that I think is really important that I think we should talk about is how, you and I have been in these non-ordinary states of consciousness where we have literally experienced somatically, visually, through sound, through whatever, but the vibration, right? That is the universe, right? The frequencies, the wavelengths, the things that we can't normally see in everyday perception, you and I have experienced on some level in many different contexts, right? Listening to music, during sexual experience, all sorts of things, right? We feel these vibrations. Even the experience you're talking about at the festival with the meditator, he's vibrating at a different frequency than the people who are drinking alcohol around him. They're vibrating at an alcohol-induced frequency, right? Which is it's a depressant, so it's probably much slower frequency. And so coming from a slow frequency, you see a high vibrating thing, and you're like, something is wrong with that. Mm-hmm. But we've experienced these frequencies, these things that, like you said, science has not yet caught up with the importance of. The mystical traditions have been talking a long time about them. Chakra practices, acupuncture, Reiki, all these ancient practices have been utilizing knowledge systems about energy flow and knowledge systems about the invisible to heal people for many, many thousands of years. And we here in the West are slow to kind of take up that, I guess, that I'm imagining, like, when I was a kid, I had a coloring box, right? And it was the standard, like, 12 colors or whatever. I'm like, these colors are awesome. But then my friend next to me had, like, the pastel colors, and I'm like, oh, man.
64. Yeah.
Oh, I want those ones, Because I thought my 12 crayons were all that I had. I thought that that's all that existed. And then all of a sudden I know that there's different shades of each one of these things that I can engage in. You talk about medicines and availability, and what came to mind is like if a woman goes to a nail salon, or a man goes to a nail salon to get their nails done, there's like racks and racks and racks of different colors. But the person that goes in there to that nail salon with all that selection and picks the same one or two every time, is I don't know, maybe doing a disservice you know, to their perception. Like you said, like people who are brought up in this alcohol, tobacco, things that are legal, I'm okay with. But there's all these other opportunities on the shelf.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm only going to select these 3.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you're limiting your consciousness to those 3 experiences,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And I personally think it's okay if someone just wants the color green and burgundy anytime they get their nails done. However, then don't get mad at the person who wants 17 different colors.
Mm.
Don't try to persecute that person. You know, so it's okay if someone just wants to listen to one type of music, imbibe nicotine and ethanol, you know, alcohol and cigarettes. But why do you have to then oppose someone else who chooses something different, especially if they're practicing in a safe way that's non-threatening to one's culture? You know, that's where I draw the line. It's almost like, if you want to take another metaphor, religion. Like, it's okay that I believe that, I don't want to insult anyone, in a certain religious paradigm, and that's my truth, and that's how I believe I'm going to operate in the world. However, if my truth then says, because you don't believe what I believe, you're going to a bad place, and your belief structure is going to take you down a bad path, that seems negative. And it seems very similar with drug use patterns, you know, in our current society. And it doesn't seem like it's based on science. It seems like it's more based on superstition and a lot of biases, you know. I do want to get back to what you were saying about energetics, because I think that, you know, you were relating energetics to things like acupuncture and old knowledge-based traditions. One of the things I found very interesting is we do, with our basic sciences, know about energetic resonances, about energy frequencies. The Schumann resonance is an energetic wavelength that happens on the planet Earth. It's a certain hertz, a certain frequency, and it is...
Is that the 433 or something?
I think it's only like 6 or 8 hertz, and it's been slowing down. It's theorized to impact the way that a lot of different electromagnetic activity on the planet Earth happens, but I don't think anyone, well, at least I don't really understand it well. I know that certainly astrophysics is developing understanding about how the planets and the sun interact in terms of energetic resonance and wavelengths and energy that flows between them. And certainly if you explore quantum physics and the idea of matter and antimatter, there's a lot of exchange that happens there that really brilliant physicists understand on some level, that starts to look a lot like, you know, old world traditions like you were talking about, like Taoism, acupuncture, Buddhism, things that were spoken about in the Vedic tradition, you know, and even in somewhat in our Western cultures, you know, what was held in, I'm struggling to find the word, and you want to convert one metal into another.
Alchemy.
Alchemy, thank you, the alchemy tradition. The types of ideas that those people held on to seem to be what better explained by quantum physics and what we're understanding at a subanatomic level than Newtonian physics, which is really how we've based most of our understanding the last 150 years, you know, in the Industrial Revolution. And if you think about the Industrial Revolution and the way that people think in general in today's society, it's based upon producing goods, moving ourselves forward with our modern technologies, and also fitting into the modern work week, you know. And some would argue that even alcohol benefits that type of model, because you can go home, you can drink at night, you can go to sleep, you can get up, you can go to work in the morning, you know. If someone takes LSD and they have a 12-hour experience after their, you know, 12-hour shift, and then they don't feel like working in the morning, well, that really messes things up, especially if they start thinking to themselves, why am I working for this boss and doing all these things when I could have a much simpler life in a simpler ecology, you know? So, not to try to wrap too many things together, but I would say simply that I think our new science is reflecting what used to be known in the wisdom traditions, and that people are really starting to question our modern life. And as a psychiatrist, I see so many modern psychological illnesses that people experience that seem to be that seem to be related to people being in conflict with their lifestyle. Either the relational dynamics they have within their family, within their job, within the greater socio-political scheme. People have these conflicts that make them unhappy. And enough of those things add up, and they start to think, I don't want to do this, I want to die, I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I'm having panic. And maybe people who are more susceptible are having psychotic symptoms or even bipolar symptoms. And so what I think is happening on the planet is that all of this sort of craziness that is unabated and unbalanced is just making people psychologically ill. And we're trying to put more and more pharmaceuticals on top of them to suppress the symptoms. But, you know, a metaphor I use with my patients a lot is, if you have a kitchen and you leave out a lot of food and cockroaches come, you can spray Raid on the cockroaches, but eventually the cockroaches will become resistant and they'll come back. You need to clean the food up. You know, you need to clean the kitchen. So if you come to me and you're having panic symptoms, I can give you clonazepam, and at least while that drug lasts, before you build a tolerance to it, your panic will likely abate mostly, if not completely. But eventually, unless you clean up the food that the cockroaches are feeding on, the reason that your panic is arising, it will come back. And the drugs may not work as much or at all the next time. You know, so what are we really doing?
Yeah, that's really powerful. Sorry, getting back to the energetics piece. I think you were headed in a direction that was interesting because, you know, you're right. I think these have been around with the wisdom traditions for a long time, right? And then they kind of fell off a little bit. We got too focused on 3D physical matter, right? Newtonian physics, right? So many people are still stuck in that paradigm. And that was a long time. Quantum physics has been around a lot longer than people think. Like when I first started getting into quantum physics, like 10 years ago, I was like, this is a new thing. And I come to find out it's not new. It's been around for like 100 years already. You know, Einstein was already, you know, making postulations about it. And it's been around a lot longer than we think. So then I bring in I'm going to introduce to the topic collective consciousness, right? So there's this collective piece or combination of pieces to make the collective consciousness that seems to drive progress in one way or another, progress or degress or whatever. Why do you think that it takes so long for the majority, I guess, because once you have a majority, the collective consciousness can shift, right? Why do you think it takes so long for the majority to reach that tipping point where we need to make those kind of changes, or where we need to reconsider how we use drugs for evocation of, bringing up the trauma to deal with it and rip it apart, to put it back together and
help people evolve.
Right, rather than just suppress it. Like the majority of Americans, I bet, if we go out on the street today and ask them, what would you do for depression? Oh, I'll take a pill for it. We're in the suppression mindset, but there are the minority of us who believe that that's not the answer, that we need to heal what is really underneath there, the roots, the cheese that you left on the floor and the cockroaches are eating it, right? We need to take care of the problem first rather than the symptoms. We can manage the symptoms. It's like a side project. Why are we staying stuck there?
I can never remember whose quote this is. I think it was Descartes, but I could be really wrong. He said, knowledge is neither created nor destroyed, it simply becomes culturally relevant. And in fact, I don't think it was Descartes, now that I say it aloud. But in any case, what they were trying to indicate by saying that is, knowledge, people have thought of stuff long, long ago that until, like you said, society at large is willing to accept it, it doesn't matter. Wilhelm Reich developed all these ideas a long time ago about cancer and how people have sort of unhealed emotional wounds that get caught in their body and cause cancers. And recently I found a textbook describing more of this this ideology, if you'll call it that, which still, of course, isn't embraced by the conventional wisdom of medical science, but it's something people think about more now than I think when Wilhelm Reich was alive and trying to do this work. So I think it's a very metaphysical question what you're asking. Why does this process take so long? Why does it take so long to convince people? And I think it goes back to why do you think we're here? We're essentially intelligent monkeys who have consciousness and awareness and a lot of neurotic tendencies, So why are we on this rock moving at whatever it is, 163,000 miles per hour, spinning around a burning rock, and we're intelligent monkeys fighting with each other? And what is the purpose of all of this? And certainly there's constructs like heaven and hell and all these sort of religious dogmatic overtones to what this is supposed to represent. And other people are, not as easily convinced, and they're like, no, it has no meaning. I'm just living my life for hedonic reasons or trying to be a good person, whatever that means to me. And I think I'm hesitant to interject my own ideology, but I think there are certainly those who believe, and I will say I'm among them, that we're here to grow and learn and evolve as spiritual beings manifest in physical bodies. So we have the opportunity as a group of spiritual beings collected on this planet, several billion of us, to try to move forward, to evolve, to learn things, to be better, whatever that means. And we get to decide what that means to be better and to evolve. We get to create those constructs. And for some people that might be having a successful business and buying a car and going to college and saving the right amount of money, and that's success, that's evolution, because their parents or their grandparents weren't able to do that. And for other people it might mean taking on a religion and becoming involved in that religion and finding some sense of meaning within that religion. And for other people still, it might be about seeking a higher truth, like we're talking about a little bit here, although I caution that too could be seen as a delusion, a construct that's false.
Right, seeking something that might not be there. It might just be a construct we made up.
Yeah.
Is there a higher truth, or is it just what it is?
Yeah. Are we intelligent monkeys on a rock and we evolved from single-cell organisms and we're spinning around a burning rock that eventually will go out and everything in this system will die? And that's all the meaning there was to it, because it's some sort of science experiment that's playing out that none of us know why it started or why it will end, or is this an intentional construct with an intelligent design,
It's interesting. I was listening. Do you know who Duncan Trussell is? He's this comedian that I listen to. He's also very hip on psychedelics. He was a comedian at the MAPS conference in 2017 also.
Oh, really? Yeah, I was there.
Yeah, super funny. But he said something the other day on his podcast that stuck with me, and he said, it was in relation to people who kind of fear, who live their lives in a sense of fear, mostly around fear of death and pain and suffering. And he says, he just has this big cackling laugh, and he says, the universe is going to eat us all.
Right.
We're all going to be eaten up by the universe, and it was so true, because everything that comes into being ends by nature, it's the very fact that it has come into being means that it's gonna end. So the sun is gonna explode someday, and all this stuff that we're worried about cultivate, we're gonna go to Jupiter, we're gonna go to different planets and colonize, all that's great. But the sun's gonna swallow all that up. Everything is gonna be gone in a black hole one day.
Yeah.
And then what's the purpose after that? And so that's the question, right?
Totally. And yeah. Exactly. That is the big question.
Oh, yeah. So let's take a quick commercial break,
okay.
And then we'll get right back into it, because I know you got a good response to that.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right, folks, we're back for segment number 2 with Dustin, and both of us completely forgot what we were talking about in the last segment. So for the listeners, sorry about that. Our stream of consciousness just continued during the break as I changed out the GoPro battery. But I did want to wrap back around to talking about energetics just a little bit, and see what your thoughts were, because, and you gave me a brief outline, I guess, of your background, your educational background, and it wasn't a traditional pathway through medicine, right? You first went a different route and then found your pathway this way, right? So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about energetics as far as like how you were how you were taught and your pathway through schooling too, because my pathway was, I mean, I think everyone's pathway to psychedelic science or psychedelic medicine is different, you know, and I like that about it. I like the diverse experience that comes to the table.
Yeah. So, for me, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, I had kind of early life, teen, like 16, 17, 18-year-old exposures to psychedelic medicines before I actually knew of them as medicines. You know, they were illicit drugs that people had offered me at an early age. And then I went through a period in my 20s where I was...
Hold on. Sorry, before you
Go ahead,
move on,
please.
I just want to get a sense of who you were, like, back in your teens. Like,
Mhm.
who was Dustin Dippen back in your teens? Because Shay LeMaster in my teens, the people who knew me from back then, which is also another interesting thing, that the people who knew you back then who haven't known you since still hold a memory of
Right.
you back then
As a high schooler,
and still
yeah.
assume that that's who you are.
Right.
That's a very interesting thought.
Yeah.
But who I was back then is totally different than today. Like, back then, I wanted to watch the world burn. I wanted to watch everybody and everything around me come crashing down. I wanted destruction. I wanted myself destructed, and that was like the relationship that I had with drugs. Was how much can I get in my body, and how close can I bring myself to death, and then do it again the next day.
Right.
Totally unhealthy relationship. And so I want to get a sense of who you are, because I know you're not who you were back then.
Yeah.
For sure.
Or even 2 months ago. But
Right.
Yeah.
who I mean, who were you? What was your scene back in your high school days?
Well, like in high school, I guess I'll characterize it this. I was really overweight and awkward and into video games and really nerdy. And I had a few friends who liked magic cards with me. And then I went to this new high school where my friend, one of my friends was a jock, and suddenly I was kind of in more of a popular group, and I evolved, if you want to use the word evolved, I changed to be someone who, you know, was in the plays, in choir, on the football team. My junior year of high school, I was class president, I was in the yearbook, blah, 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 all these different things. And I was kind of the quintessential high school kid that everybody wanted, the popular kid.
Have you ever seen the movie She's All That?
I think I have. I don't really remember it right now.
It's about this really nerdy girl who
Right.
gets
I
transformed
remember
by
it from
this
the
guy.
80s. Yeah.
Right, it's from that 90s or something, and she gets transformed into like the most popular girl. Like that's
Right.
what I'm picturing. Like
I remember.
like overweight Dustin sitting in front of him playing video games, nerdy, and then all of a sudden, whoosh, becomes
Yeah.
like this totally new
Right.
force in his high school.
Yeah, and at the time, I remember I started smoking cigarettes, and I was working in my parents' bar in a rural area in Wisconsin, so I had access to alcohol, and I was, you know, a kid that could drink if I wanted to. Essentially, in Wisconsin, you can drink in a bar if your parents are there, and you know they condone
Really?
that. Yeah.
Underage.
Yes, as long as your parents are there. And I could work in the bar because my parents owned it. So at the age of 14, I could open the bar on a Sunday morning and serve drinks to people, and I was the only person in the bar that worked there. You know, I had this life starting around age 14 where I was kind of the cool kid in this redneck, small town Wisconsin way. You know, I had a Camaro, I smoked cigarettes, girls liked me as class president, you know, play sports, all this stuff. And that's, from the people around me, that seemed like I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. I was kind of a good version of myself, even though looking back, I was extremely unhealthy, psychologically, physically. And even though that was an evolution from the kid that just sat around and played video games and magic cards and was very uncomfortable with himself and anxiety-ridden, it was still a very unhealthy version of myself. And that's why I think when I was exposed to psychedelic medicines, you know, with some friends who were probably from the wrong side of the tracks, as you'd put it, it really kind of blew open my worldview, and I realized that I didn't want to be this person who would become popular and unhealthy, and I also didn't want to be the awkward, nerdy video game guy either. Not that there's anything wrong with those archetypes, it just, I realized that that wasn't really where I wanted to be in life, and there was more out there for me. And it caused me to want to leave my hometown my senior year of high school, and I went away to a college prep school because in my mind that would be sort of moving on in life. And my 17-year-old self saw that as an opportunity to grow quicker than I would if I would have stayed in my hometown. So I went and stayed with family friends, and I went to this kind of fancier private school for a year. And what I found there were a lot of people who were privileged, wealthy, but still rather closed-minded in their own way. And to them, I was this redneck kid who was coming in, and I was proud that I quit smoking and I was exercising more and eating well and taking care of myself. And the weekends I was still doing psychedelics with my friends, and they were still having their normal lives, and I was still playing soccer and had a 3.9 GPA and all the things that you're supposed to do as a high school kid. But in the weekends I would have this other experience that my friends, they would go play board games and hang out and watch TV, and I would go take LSD with my friends.
So almost like a dual life.
Yeah,
Like
very much
completely.
so.
Like
yeah.
like at 10 p.m. Friday night, I switch modes into this other simulation.
Right, and I remember I would smoke pot at night just to help kind of calm me down and help me sleep, and I would smoke weed like probably almost every night, and I would still be one of the top performers in school, and an athlete and all these things, and it was really hard to find people to relate to, because I had friends who partied and smoked cigarettes and drank alcohol or smoked a lot of pot or whatever, but they weren't really where I was at, because I was
Tell me about it.
running 3 miles a day and going to soccer meets and doing my homework and being really passionate.
Really, it's interesting. We're really successful at maintaining what we need to do. What we need to take care of business. And I think one of my greatest achievements was telling my mom on my graduation day from my undergrad that I was high on cannabis every single day for my undergrad.
Yeah.
Because she thought, she said, if you keep doing these drugs, if you keep smoking this pot, you're never going to make anything of yourself. And I said, watch me do this. Watch how I do this, and it's gonna be beautiful.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think looking back, similar to your experience in college, I smoke weed probably because I have undiagnosed ADHD, or at least it's self-diagnosed, and that cannabis was something that helped me to remain focused enough to do my schoolwork. And so, at least that's how I conceptualize it now as a psychiatrist.
It's a focusing tool for you.
It allowed me in college to calm down enough to be focused on a task for a period of time. Not that I would get high necessarily before I studied, but after studying, and that would stay with me throughout the day, the next day, and it created some short-term memory deficits or whatever, but by and large, it gave me the correction I needed to be able to sit down and read stuff for 6 hours straight, like I had to do in college. And but once again, in college, I kind of lived this dual life too, where I had people who were really into partying, and they were kids from the wrong side of the tracks, so to speak. And then I had more straight edge friends who, were doing what you're supposed to be doing. They're getting a degree, they're doing their homework, they're going to the library on the weekends. And I was somewhere in the in-between. If I continue the story, after college I went to South America, and I taught for a little while, like English classes in Argentina and Chile a little bit. Then I moved to Costa Rica, and the same thing, taught for a few months in this school with Korean children. I was teaching a variety of subjects to this woman who was trying to open a new school, but I was basically just teaching her children. And I was growing dreadlocks at that time and going to the beach on the weekends and playing my drum. And then through that process, somewhere I got it in my head that I wanted to study natural medicine. I think living in Costa Rica, going to the market, seeing the herbs, that people were saying, oh, this is for diabetes, this is for hypertension, realizing there was, and I was into yoga and meditation at the time, realizing there was this whole other way of conceptualizing medicine. And then I found naturopathic medicine, which proclaimed itself to be the alternative, to conventional medicine, and also grounded in science. So I went that route, and then I picked up Chinese medicine along the way, was doing that for a while, and then I kind of got struck at one point that I wanted more. I was learning about energetics, I was studying Qigong and Tai Chi, and I was doing body work and energy manipulation, kind of like Reiki, or they called it core synchronism. And it really helped me to understand there's so many tools, and really it's about access. And an MD has access to a variety of patients, or at least this is how I used to think about it back when I was maybe in my late 20s, thinking, gosh, if I was an MD, I really could do whatever I wanted. In fact, there was this one MD who was an internist who had kind of gone to the dark side of Chinese medicine and left conventional medicine behind, and he said, jokingly one day, because I'm an MD, if I had a therapy that I could do with a shotgun, I could do that if I could sort of give some sort of scientific basis for what I'm going to do. I could do that because I have MD after my name. And being naive at that time in my life, I really kind of thought, oh great, he's got some wisdom. I'm going to follow that. I'm going to get an MD. And it wasn't until much later, and about $100,000 in student debt, that I realized that being an MD puts you in a system in which you're controlled by a lot of things, hospital bylaws, gold standards of care, appropriate prescribing practices, American Medical Association guidelines. All these different things dictate how I'm supposed to act as a medical doctor who's board certified and has all these credentials. So it's not as though I can just walk around with the shotgun saying this is my therapy, as that one doctor back in the day may have sort of made it sound. But I will say being an MD in a lot of people's minds also gives me some degree of relevance, and it does give me access to people. People listen to what I say. If I say, hey, fish oils have evidence for lowering inflammation, and there are some studies that indicate it can help with ADHD symptoms, people will listen to that partially because I have these letters after my name, and I've racked up lots of student loans and hours and tens of thousands of hours studying and being involved in medical contexts. So it's fascinating to me, coming from where I was as a kid and as a teenager and as a college student and even as a person in my 20s trying to figure it all out, to now be where I am in my late 30s and watch how people receive information that I give them. And, I try to have a lot of integrity about the information that I transmit, especially in a clinical sense. If I'm speaking about fish oils for inflammation and ADHD, I'm happy to send those articles to patients. I'm not just spouting off or trying to convince people of something that doesn't have a basis in scientific reality. But it is fascinating to think about the placebo effect that simply my credential has on people, that just being in my presence. And sometimes I've worked in contexts where people have to wait 2 months to be able to get in and see me. By the time that someone has waited 2 months to see me, they've built up in their mind what this interaction will represent to them. And I think that this fluoxetine or Prozac that I prescribe to them sometimes after 2 months of them waiting to see me can be transformative, partially because they've built up.
They're finally getting something. They're like, yay,
That's
there's
right.
finally something in my hands.
This priest that I've been waiting to see,
Yes.
journeyed thousands
You
of
could
miles.
give them a piece of blank paper and say, eat this paper, and it'll make you feel better. They'll be like, oh, yes, thank you,
And I think that's something we need to be so aware of when we talk about any type of intervention.
Man, and I'm not a doctor, you're a doctor, but sometimes I have clients come to me or they'll introduce me to a friend and they'll be like, this is my doctor, this is Dr. Shane, or they'll refer to me that way, and I'm like, whoa, like I'm not that, I'm
Right.
I'm not I don't want to put myself out there as more than what and credentials are, they're still just language jargon still, but they do solidify at least standards for experience and base standards. But I like that with your integrative methodology, like you take that base standard and then you're like, okay, this over here is going to work as well, and this I'm going to take this from this tradition, and this works as well here too. Sorry, I'm getting kind of lost in. I've been running this thought through my mind since you said it, so I'm going to go back to it and
Please.
ask you this question. So you're hanging out on the beach of Costa Rica, right?
Yes.
Hanging out on the beach of Costa Rica with your drums
Dreadlocks, yeah.
and drums. Oh man,
Twirling the dreadlocks.
I
yeah.
swear, man, I've had dreams like that.
Mhm.
I told my wife, like, babe, we're gonna find ourselves in Bali, and I'm gonna have long blonde dreads, and I'm gonna be
Mhm.
teaching my kids jujitsu on the white sandy beaches,
Mhm.
and that is like it's
The
a
dream,
right?
yeah.
Did the island experience itself?
Costa Rica's not an island,
Okay,
but I have lived on islands. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
but it's like an islander type experience.
Yeah, there's
right?
beaches on either. It's a
palm trees.
Yep, all that.
Right. You don't feel like you're part of a large land mass.
Nope.
Right.
You can go to the coast on either side.
So it still feels that way. Does that have some sort of influence in your story, like being in nature? Like I'm sure you know, for like Darwin and people like that, being in the Galapagos Islands, surrounded by that kind of nature, grounded his mind into starting to think about evolution in these crazy ideas, right? And
Yeah.
think about nature because he was immersed in it, right?
Right.
An islander mindset is completely different from a mainlander, right? Like a
Right.
Hawaiian would say, or something like that.
Right.
Do you think your experience down there in Costa Rica was environmentally? Do you think it had like an impact on the rest of your life moving forward? Like
Definitely.
yeah.
And I wouldn't just I would go further to say that I think in general people's early life experiences, they dictate how we see the world. They dictate to some degree at least how we respond to stressors, novel situations, and I can't say for sure how all those experiences impacted me, of course, because I am just who I am today, right? But I definitely remember some rather peak experiences, being on my own, camping, hiking by myself. There's like 160 some species of poisonous snakes in Costa Rica, and I remember seeing snakes when I'm, hours back in the jungle by myself and being like, gosh, if I get bit by that snake and it's one of those poisonous ones, I'm probably done. And I remember other times too, just being on the beach with tourists. I was a tourist too, of course. I was only there, but people who were just down for a week or something, and interacting with them, or locals, and hanging out and kind of learning some. And I spoke decent Spanish, so I was able to integrate to some degree. So yeah, that definitely impacts who I am. It impacts how I am as a doctor. It impacts how I am as a person. Much like you, when someone say, "Oh, this is Dr. Dippen," I'll often say, for clients, my name is Dr. Dippen, but my name is Dustin. Like
Right.
I'm not a doctor that went to school to be called doctor. Not that there's anything wrong with the people who did do that, but that was never my intent, to get a credential so that I could change my identity and be known as my education.
Right.
It was.
I don't require you to call me this surname or whatever, doctor,
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah.
Like that's not why we do it.
Right.
We do it because we are passionate about the knowledge, about the information there.
Yeah.
And then the credential just comes along with it.
And to be able to have access, because
Yeah.
I'm at a place now where people can get to know me either through social media or through a recommendation of someone who knows me, and they can go online and they can sign up to see me, and they can give their credit card number, and they can pay me to come see me, and I can prescribe them medications or make other recommendations for diagnoses that I make based upon the diagnostic interview. And this is a construct that came out of years and years of study, but essentially it's very similar to how I used to feel sitting on the beaches in Costa Rica talking to someone about what's going on with them, and like, gosh, man, that sounds really tough, and do you want to talk more about that? Is there anything more I can do for you? And sometimes I feel like I'm still that same person 15 years later. It's just that now I have all this other knowledge base to interpret, sometimes in a positive and sometimes in a negative way, and that it doesn't always benefit me or the client.
Sure.
Some of the things that I've been taught.
Yeah, so like the communal piece, I hear you talking about the communal piece, like the islander, or that feel of community, right? Hey, you're my brother, I'm going to take care of you, are you okay?
Yeah.
But also your description of going into the market that day, like here's these herbs for this thing, and in Western science we may not recognize that, right? But your experience from that, I'm sure that just like blew your mind wide open. Like there are so many things that Western science just does not know.
Right.
Right. So
Yeah.
I'm going to go find those things. Not to say that Western science is bad, but I'm going to add to it because it's not good enough. Right. It's not sufficient enough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think going back to the conversation we were having earlier about psychedelics, it's amazing to me that people can have these transpersonal experiences, go beyond themselves, feel like they're exploring other realms or having insights about physiology or the universe around them that later can be substantiated by objective science. So the idea that someone's experience under the influence of a substance may inform something that later on we can determine by using objective science, telescopes, MRI, theoretical physics constructions, or even working out with mathematical formulas, how is that even possible? You know, your podcast is about peak experiences to some degree. How is it possible that the human mind can instantly go to a place under the influence of a substance that someone may take 10, 20, 30 years to try to understand under their linear everyday consciousness, you know, and to develop and write into a book format that is accepted by our conventional everyday science? I mean, that just seems like a cheat code in a video game.
Right, not only that, like the meditative path, right, takes 50 years to achieve this, right? You take a psychedelic, you get there much faster, right? But also, there's this aspect, too, that I've been talking with other people that, you know, we have these, it doesn't have to be a psychedelic experience or a substance experience. It can be an altered state of any kind, but some memory is formed, right? Something big happened.
Mm-hmm.
And then you forget about it. And 30, 40 years go by, and then you look back and you can start unpacking that event then, right?
Mm-hmm.
So things, you know, events and situations change meaning over time like that for us too. And I think it's almost like it's almost like time travel in a way. Really cool stuff. Like, we have no idea what effect we're having on us now and on our future, and are we having an effect on the past right now? Like, who freaking knows? It's pretty cool.
Earlier today you said this to me about not knowing how something's going to impact someone. I was talking about some frustrations about some of the therapy I was doing.
Yeah.
Was that you? Yeah. And I had a mentor of mine, Byron White, actually, who said, you know, sometimes you don't know the effect you're going to have on people, and you're not supposed to know. You know, that's not for you to know what you do to impact people currently.
But people want it.
But people want to know. Yeah,
I want to know I'm doing good, right?
Well, and in our society, we want to know, like as a doctor, I want to know if I told you to take fluoxetine for 6 weeks and then you come back to see me, are you less depressed? Let me have you fill out a questionnaire. Are the numbers on this scale lower? Okay, that indicates that the degree of your symptoms of depression have reduced, and since I gave you a pill 6 weeks ago, that obviously is related to the degree of reduction in symptoms, and it's very easy for me then to write a note that I send to your insurance company saying, you see, I treated this with a condition, now you need to pay me for the initial visit and this visit, I'm a good doctor, case closed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where one of the questions I'm very fond of asking when someone comes back in to see me and they say, oh, I'm feeling so much better since I started fluoxetine, thank you doctor, I say, and what do you think made that change? And they'll kind of look at me and were there things in your life that altered, you know?
It wasn't the fluoxetine?
Well, you know, are there relationships that changed
sure.
for you? Did you have a change in your job?
Mm-hmm.
Did you get money from somewhere? Did your long-lost lover call you back suddenly? Have you had a good connection with your family again? Have you started exercising again? Has your sleep improved? Have you seen a good movie lately? Have you had a good laugh? Did you make any good new friends, you know?
And everything matters.
Right. And so, like, it's always interesting to me that people will say, oh, yes, that fluoxetine's so wonderful. It helped me so much. No side effects, doctor. Everything's great. I want to stay on it. Oh, now that you mention it, you know, job did change for the better. Got a new puppy. Was able to go home and visit my parents. And I'm eating better and sleeping better. And I started a new exercise routine. And I think that really I did those things because I started fluoxetine. I'm like, oh, that's really wonderful. You know, that's so great that you were able to do all those things since you've started the fluoxetine. And maybe at some point we could try taking that fluoxetine away in the future. You know, when you've been better for a while, we'll just try taking it away and we'll see if these gains can be sustained. And most people, even if their everyday consciousness is wrapped around the conventional psychiatric model, they'll say, okay, we could try that. You know, because nobody really wants to have to take a pill every day. Well, I shouldn't say nobody. A lot of people don't want to have to take a pill every day to feel the way that they want to feel. So they're kind of excited that they'd find a doctor who would maybe be willing to take that pill away. But in the same token, they feel like, hey, maybe this pill, this is helping me, so I want to keep it right now. I will take this every day for now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's really interesting to work with people's minds in that way, to see, is this medicine really doing something for you, or do you think it's? And to be honest, I think even in the future, if we do get MDMA and psilocybin and some other, you know, currently illicit psychedelic substances, well, I'm hesitant to say that MDMA is a psychedelic, but these medicines that can be used in a therapeutic context that have these potential to create altered consciousness, if we can get them approved in the future, I think we'll see a similar thing. I do think they have potential to promote real change for people, but I also think it's about context. It's about mindset and setting the environment, and it's also about people's intentions, what they want to take from it. And I think we have to be conscious about how we proceed with investigating these substances, that we could fall into the same trappings as pharmaceutical companies have with fluoxetine or sertraline or any other of these drugs that we use every day. How much of this is placebo? How much of it is expectation? How much of it is believing in a scientific model that this thing is going to help me? So it does,
Yeah, even with sugar. My wife is, excuse me, she's studying nutrition at Colorado State, and she said one of her friends the other day reached out to her. This is one of our mutual friends that we had. So Callie and I met at this treatment center. So we're both line staff, treatment clinicians at an inpatient facility for adolescent girls, right? Mostly conduct disorder, but a wide range. Like we had schizophrenics on campus, or schizoaffective. We had conduct disorder. We had self-harm. We had all sorts of things. And this friend reached out to her for some dieting advice, and she said, I have these goals, and I want to achieve these things. I want to lose this weight. And Callie's like, okay, well, what about this little aspect of your life? So this woman drinks like a caramel macchiato every single day, right?
They're tasty.
Oh yeah. I haven't had one in years because whatever. But her friend she's like, I have this every day. And Callie says, well, what do you think about like with the fluoxetine, right? You're like, what if we take that away from you in the future? And she was like, no, don't take my coffee away. Yeah. Callie was like making just one little suggestion. She's like, well, what if we like took the whipped cream off the top of it? She's like, no. Well, can we do decaf? Yeah, I guess as long as it doesn't change the taste and I'm still getting the sugar content, I'm okay with it, right? So there's this thing where like people are scared to budge, like they don't want to let go of the thing that they find consistent, right? Consistency is like this. So as human organisms, and all organisms are trying to seek homeostasis and symbiosis, right? And drugs are one way to do that, right? To modify our behavior. I don't know. It just gets me thinking a lot about that whole rabbit hole.
Right. It reminds me of this book called Who Moved My Cheese. Have you ever heard of this book?
Who Moved My Cheese?
Yeah. No. It's like this almost like children's book, but it's made about I think it's about 100 pages, and it's written in really simplistic language about 4 mice. And the mice live in a maze, and every day they go to this place where and this isn't my story, this is a well-written book that other people should explore, for the record. And I probably won't do it justice, so please go read the book. But there's a pile of cheese, and there are 4 different types of mice. And every day they're going, and they're seeing that this pile of cheese is dwindling. And it's a book that talks about the way that we respond to change and the need to change. And of course there's one mouse that says, oh no, the cheese has always been here, it's always going to be here, the cheese will return. And there's another mouse that says, oh no, the cheese pile isn't dwindling, it's the same size it's always been.
Denial.
Right. And then there's another mouse still that says, okay, I need to start looking for more cheese, And then maybe the 4th mouse, I think, is like a catastrophizer, like, oh my god, the cheese is going away.
It's going to run out
what is going to happen? Yeah. So, and it talks about how we as human beings deal with change, and it's something that you often use in organizational structures in business or whatever to help people understand, like, hey, when you encounter a need for change or a stressor in your environment, there's different ways you can choose to respond. And I think that speaks a little to what you were just talking about. It's like, how do we choose to respond to changes in our environment, to the need to shift? And to me, that's the basis of a lot of mental health concerns, is like, well, how do you adapt to change?
Right.
Does it create a mental wellness concern for you when a change comes into your environment? Is this a pattern for you, or is this an acute thing that only happened one time? Has this been happening your whole life? Is this happening as a result of a trauma that you experienced earlier in life? Does your whole family respond to change like this? You know, all the different ways that we characterize mental.
So is it merely just an adaptation? You know, someone's ability to adapt to whatever comes their way, and say someone is more adaptable, right? So you can throw more random circumstances at them, and they can adapt their life and their circumstance to fit that, versus someone who is like maybe more rigid. So maybe rigidity versus flexibility factored in there too. I'm thinking. So what came to my mind is this new theory that I'm working on, and it's probably way off base, but I thought it was interesting. So I'm gonna tell you about it.
Please.
It's about it was centered around motion sickness, right? So I had this client come in, and he was talking to me about how he always gets motion sick, and we were talking about, well, what is that? What is motion sickness? And what we came to, in our session was that, any sort of deviation away from what feels comfortable is going to create some perceptual disruption, right? So we conceive of like homeostasis and symbiosis, and this is, I'm in this balanced, supreme being state. Anything that takes me off of that is going to make me a little woozy, a little wobbly, right? We had some, I've seen, today in our group experience, right? There were some, motion. Some of these substances cause motion sickness, right? But it's because we're just shifting a little bit outside of what our normal operating procedure is, and it's it's sort of like we're
discombobulated.
Yeah, just a little bit, not like wretched, vomiting and like you're on a roller coaster ride. Like that can happen too, but just these small shifts off of normal, kind of make our energetic system uneasy. When you feel like you're gonna throw up, you feel the energy like building. You're like, something's not right here, right? But I've had instances where I've felt that feeling, and then I get right back on track, and then it goes away.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, now I'm settled in. Now I'm back into the reality that I'm okay with. But then there's other times where I'm feeling sick, and the more the more away from that ordinary, I'm using quotation marks, ordinary state of consciousness I get away from, it's almost like I'm off balance, right? And there could be more movement, more nausea, more energy there.
So what's your theory around
just the theory is, and it's still building, but just that maybe motion sickness is just simply someone's inability to adapt to this slight deviation from the norm, right? Like me, we go driving up in the canyon, I'm fine. I can adapt just great. You and I go on a motorcycle ride up through the canyon would be great. Take my wife up the canyon, she can't handle it. She'll get car sick, right? Because she's not in control of the back and forth of her body. She's disconnected from her normal state of okayness in that moment, and so it makes her a little upset, a little sick. Seasickness, I can see that too. Like you're at the whims of the ocean, right?
Oh yeah.
You have no control over where you're swaying, where you're going. And if you can't adapt to that, then you get sick. But if you can adapt to that, then you're fine. Right? So maybe it's somewhere in this adaptive capacity within a person, which I also think can be trained. It can be explored. It can be grown in a person. Adaptive capacity. Someone who doesn't know how to adapt can be taught how to adapt, so that they don't get so sick in their own life. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I see this a lot with children who have behavioral disturbance, and certainly if they would meet criteria for autism spectrum disorder, they may have like texture intolerance or intolerance to loud sounds or changes in social context, all these different things. But even just children who wouldn't meet criteria for autism spectrum disorder, they often, I shouldn't say they often, patients present to me with problems with adaptation. You know, they get really anxious. They manifest symptoms of OCD, you know, double tapping, obsessional thinking, rituals, excessive hand washing, need for a cleanliness in order, poor adaptation to change. And it's so fascinating to see that this can be completely overwhelming to a young organism, to a child of between the ages of 6 and 12. And yet, I often meet a lot of adults who will say, oh, I had that stuff when I was younger. You know, I mean, I do struggle with a little bit of anxiety, but it's not like that anymore. So it's like we can go through these periods as organisms, as human beings, in which we're overwhelmed. Our system is totally overly burdened, and we're trying all these adaptive mechanisms to correct it, to rectify this imbalance that we're experiencing. And maybe it's manifesting as panic or anxiety or rigidity in our personality, but it's our attempt to right what's wrong, to deal with the motion sickness, if you will.
Yeah.
You know?
To
And
get us back to some sort of stability.
equilibrium.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that for a lot of people, they do naturally learn how to do that. And maybe they don't know consciously how they did it, but, you know, I meet a lot of adults who say, yeah, when I was younger, I had some OCD stuff. I don't have that anymore, and now I just kind of have some low-level anxiety. So they learned on some level to deal with it, to cope, to adapt. They can't tell me how. They don't consciously understand that change, but the organism learned, you know. And I think that's so fascinating to think about all these things we do on autopilot, how amazing we really are as human beings. Like, it's really easy to get caught up in the pathology or the bad stuff or the things that we don't do well or we could do better, but to really marvel at how much the human organism does adapt on a regular basis. I mean, when's the last time you were in a convenience store and you saw the food choices that are there? Our body has adapted to take all of that crap in and not completely blow a gasket. Like,
not complain too bad. Maybe it was some farting or something like that.
yeah, and maybe chronically we develop hypertension or diabetes or heart disease. We could debate that all day long. But acutely, you drink a Monster and you're ready to go for a few hours. You know, it's not like your eyeball pops out of your skull.
Yeah.
Of course, then they wouldn't sell too many of those. But we are an amazing adaptable organism, you know, on a physical, an emotional, a psychological, and a spiritual level as well. You know, and getting back to kind of our earlier conversation around psychedelics, my hope is that psychedelics could inform that adaptability, that they could enhance that adaptability, and that we could create a collective consciousness for people in general to be more accepting of that potential adaptability enhancement.
Yeah. I think it's important for people to even know that they're capable of that.
Yeah.
There's so many people just kind of stuck in this learned helplessness.
Right.
For listeners out there who don't know what learned helplessness is, you know, if you're constantly fed a diet of you're not good enough, you're not worth enough, you're not, you know, you're not this, you're not that, and that becomes your own internal dialogue, and that switches over, and you can develop, you know, it's almost pessimistic, you know, like
nothing will ever change.
Nothing will ever change. I'm just gonna always be stuck here, and you know, unfortunately, there's sometimes some acceptance there, which acceptance is usually a healthy thing, but acceptance of monotony.
Right, resigning oneself to an unhealthy position in life. Like, so the original studies on learned helplessness, I think, were done with dogs, and they would put them on a side of the cage that was the floor was electrified, and they would lock them in, and they would shock them repetitively, and initially the dog would try to escape, and then after a while they just laid down and accepted they were being shocked. And then even when they opened the cage so that the dog could escape, the dog would just stay and continue to get shocked. You know, and I think, you know, this happens a lot in human beings, where we're in a situation in life where we didn't achieve the goal we wanted, we got a DUI and we couldn't finish college, so we took an entry-level position, and then we got married and had 2 children, and now we're not satisfied, and we're overindulging in alcohol and tobacco, and subtly, you know, having a lot of internal conflicts about what we wish we could have done in our life. Not to say that everyone who has that paradigm is unhappy, but I think a lot of people do have a lack of satisfaction, or they wish they could have done different things. And they feel stuck. And in some ways, feeling stuck benefits a lot of people, because if you find a human being who feels stuck and they're willing to take, you know, an entry-level salary or an entry-level hourly wage, and they're going to show up to work, they're going to do what they do, that's a valuable employee. You know, that feeds the system in a way, and why would you want that person to evolve and change? You know, one of the things that's somewhat disheartening for me to consider, and I understand this is a first world thought because some people live on less than $1 a day and are just trying to eat on this planet, but there are so many people who are stuck, and they don't need to be stuck, but it's convenient for other people who benefit from them being stuck. You know, and in my job, I have the privilege of trying to unstick people, at least to some degree. You know, I'm not saying I'm magical at this or even good at it with some people. Yeah, but that's my intent, is to try to help people move forward and evolve. But I see so many people who are stuck in psychological paradigms that they're really the authors of, but they don't even realize that they wrote the story. They wrote the narrative. They continue to keep themselves entrained in this way of being day after day. And they're the only one that has the key to unlock the door.
It's like those old choose your own adventure books.
Right.
But the person keeps reading it and choosing the same adventure.
Same story, even though they hate that story.
Yeah.
Someone comes along and goes, you know, you can go to page 67 instead of 23, right?
Yeah, or like, just put the book down.
Yeah, just burn that fucking book, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so coming back around, I want to bring this around because I know that you are passionate to a T with networking. Like, networking is like your jam these days.
Yeah.
And networking in general as a concept, I think, permeates all the things we've been talking about today. Whether it be brain chemistry or connections between people, or networks online, or anything like that. I want to talk networks a little bit with you, and psychedelics and networks.
Mm-hmm.
But I just want to throw a couple terms out to get it going. So networks as a construct, human networks,
Mm-hmm.
plant networks,
Mm-hmm.
technological networks,
Mm-hmm.
and is there a cosmic network?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right?
Right.
So I think so many of us, because we are, and I forget the term, it's not human-centric. Human-centric? Is that even a term?
I think so.
Maybe. So we are humans, and so we feel like we are the shit, and
We're the center. Yeah,
right, we're the
important
center,
stuff.
and so most of us feel like networks is a human thing, right?
Mhm.
But many animals network, ants network, bees network, but plants are awesome networkers, way better than we are. Mycelium,
Mhm.
fungus, all these things interconnected, networks, the network of the earth. And then, getting back to, is there a possibility for like a cosmic network, something beyond our solar system,
Mhm.
something where we're all connected
Mhm.
in this thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's like so many different levels that you could consider this conversation on.
Fractal.
Yeah, it's fractal in nature, as above, so below. That which you see in this very microscopic thing could be representative of the entire cosmos, kind of thing. There are books written about this, and I won't belabor that metaphor too much. I find it really interesting that, like you said, there's this mycelium network that kind of pervades the planet and maybe is the origin of life as we know it on planet Earth. There's a network in our brain that is somewhat as connected as the mycelium network, though not as abundant. And certainly we strive to create social networks. We've used to have radio, and now we have much more advanced internet, in which we can all post selfies and videos of our kittens, and cool podcasts as well. And I am in a stage of my life where I find it so fascinating the way that new ideas can develop and people can connect via social media. And some of it is maybe used in a negative way, like there's all this coverage of influencing elections, etc. But that really should be taken in stride, given all the other positive ways in which we can connect as human beings. I mean, if you think about entering a forest and you hear a bird give off a call that indicates to the squirrels that some disturbance is in the forest, we as human beings have the ability not only to communicate about potential dangers, potential amazing things that can help us to evolve and move forward and be happy in life, you know, and to help our fellow human beings be more happy, and to develop the ecology of our planet to make it more sustainable. You know, these are all things that happen right alongside with the latest CBC headline coming out about one of our leaders making some obnoxious statement. I think it's so fascinating because I come from a very rural area of the country where people had fairly closed minds around a lot of things, and when I go back there, the ideology does not seem to have evolved too terribly quickly. So there's something inherent to people wanting to change, even if the information is right in front of them, they may choose not to. And I'm in this stage of my life where I'm astounded with the amount of change happening around me, specifically with psychedelic science as it's related to mental health, and the amount of people forming organizations to develop businesses around psilocybin, and having new ways of doing therapy, some of them credentialed, some of them not credentialed, some of them in foreign countries, some of them under the radar in our own country. It's just fascinating how quickly this organism is exploding as a whole around psychedelics. And maybe it's been like this before, but the age of the internet and Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter has just exploded it in a way that has never been seen, at least by this consciousness, before, and I can't perceive that it's been done like this before in any other media of information transmission in human history. So it is fascinating to watch this development, this explosion. It's almost like a slow-acting nuclear device, in that maybe over a time course of 5 to 20 years, this evolution seems like it's going to happen that previously took a couple hundred years. I can't remember the person's name, but there was someone in the European Union that's high up in mental health that said they predict within 5 years psilocybin will replace the SSRI as a treatment for most anxiety and depression. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that timeline, but for someone who is credentialed and learned and has worked their life to get into a career position within mental health for the European Union as a representative, to go on record saying that indicates that they believe quite strongly this could actually happen. I mean, wow. And to see recently that the FDA granted breakthrough status to psilocybin as a treatment for depression, for treatment-resistant depression.
Yeah, didn't the National Institute for Mental Health also put something out recently like that too? NIMH?
Probably. I'm not aware specifically.
Not for breakthrough, but similar to the European Union, where they're saying like, hey, this is like a serious thing that
this could happen.
Right. Like this has serious potential.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's gone from where I was as a a festival goer at the age of 18 to where like, hey kid, you know anything about mushrooms, to now like, yes, psilocybin is a well-tolerated treatment that doesn't have negative physical consequences when people take high dosages of it, and it may have lasting change for addiction, for anxiety, for panic, for depression, and there are relatively few contraindications. There are certainly contraindications, and you should work with a provider if you want to explore psychedelic therapy, just like the people at Johns Hopkins say. Don't just go out and take a high dose of psilocybin. Make sure you know what you're doing and who you're working with. These need to be respected as medicines. They're not panaceas. They're not going to help everything with everyone, or everyone with everything. However, they seem to be very close to acceptance within our conventional sort of puritanical society as potential ways of helping us evolve and not be so waylaid by these neurotic tendencies of anxiety and depression.
You brought up a metaphor of forest creatures. If I were to rewind a little bit, and you said, the squirrel or the bird chirps that there's a disturbance in the forest, and it reminded me of our walk that we took today from your place to where we ate lunch. We were talking about the new Star Wars movie, and when you said that, I imagined I imagined George Lucas walking through the woods, maybe inebriated on something, and he's like, "There's a disturbance in the forest,"
right?
And he just like slurs the word forest, but it turns into force, and then he's like, "I have a movie. There's a disturbance in the force."
That's how it all started.
Right. So
origin story.
Right, but it's all like networks and stuff. But that conveniently links me back to something you said way earlier in the podcast that I wanted to make sure I asked you about, which was you mentioned one of your mentors was a Chinese medicine practitioner who went to the dark side.
Well,
right?
It was a joke in that he was
Right.
a conventional medical doctor, an internist.
Oh, and then he
trained
went
in
to
internal medicine, and then he decided to go and study Chinese medicine and leave behind his medical practice in a conventional sense. So that it was a joke saying he went to the dark side.
Okay.
It's Dr. Joke.
So it's hilarious, and the Star Wars related.
Right.
But that's something that I don't think gets talked about much in the right way, I would say. I think the media blows out of proportion, negative trip stories, negative experiences, things like that. Negative, the one outlying experience that was so terrible, and they make that national news or whatever. So, in your experience as a physician, could you speak a little bit more to there is a dark side of medicine, right?
Mhm.
There's a dark side of spirituality. There's a dark side of everything, right? There's light and dark. Everything's in balance. But people don't address the dark side. They don't talk openly about it. It's like it's underground. It's hidden. But if we're gonna, welcome and integrate all these things into one cohesive practice, we have to make friends with the dark side.
Right.
We have,
So I had a biochemistry teacher who was very into the wisdom traditions in naturopathic school, and he said to me, although he was a hardcore biochemist, he said to me, science is our best story to explain something we're trying to understand. Much like mythology was in the past, Icarus flew too close to the sun, his wax melted and he fell to the ground. This is explaining pride and egoic pursuits in life. Our periodic table of the elements, our biochemical interactions, our medical science really is our best attempt to explain something that we're trying to understand. And I think when you talk about the light or the dark, you have to give consideration on the light side to, hey, people are making attempts. They're setting an intention to understand these things and to combat illnesses. I have amazing friends who are they are treating cancer with, chemotherapeutic agents that destroy healthy tissue. And they're just amazing human beings. And other human beings who get treated by them they feel so blessed to be treated by these oncologists, these medically trained people who administer poisons in a selective fashion to destroy the cancer, ideally before the rest of the organism dies. And that's amazing, For me as a psychiatrist, I have a lot of dark ruminations on the nature of the kind of drugs that I prescribe, because I feel that research has been, in the past, in some ways it has been intentionally modulated in terms of efficacy of these drugs. And let me just speak a little bit more clearly. Pharmaceutical companies have selectively published positive trials and kept negative trials out of the public limelight so that their drugs look to perform better than they actually do. And this is not new. This has been going on since the days of Xanax coming on the market and only being studied for 8 weeks. And there are countless examples in the scientific literature, which is supposed to be kind of the Bible, the most I can't speak. It's supposed to be what we rely on and the foundation of our knowledge base, the scientific literature. And when you actually look at the efficacy of psychiatric drugs, it's not that great. At the end of the day, they help some of the people some of the time with some of the conditions. And unfortunately, a lot of the diagnostic systems have been developed in accordance with these drugs. So it's a system in which, we treat panic disorder with clonazepam. So the insurance company will pay when you diagnose someone with panic disorder and treat them with clonazepam. You prescribe them clonazepam. Even though that drug may not have been studied long term, there are some scientific studies out there that demonstrate it helps people. There are also a slew of studies that demonstrate long term it may have negative side effects for people. When I was a medical student, I was astounded at how my professors, even in the basic sciences, weren't comfortable with admitting what they really didn't know. And we have all these terms in medicine like primary hypertension. When a physician says that to you, you're like, oh, okay, I have primary hypertension. Like, I've been diagnosed with primary hypertension. What does that mean? It means that you have high blood pressure, that the pressure of the blood in your blood vessels is elevated on 3 different times that we measured it, and we don't actually know why that is. And so we call it primary, meaning we don't really know what's causing that. But it sounds really scientific, right? Primary hypertension. Secondary hypertension means that it's secondary to a cause. So you just had some nicotine, or you have too much salt in your bloodstream, or your kidneys are producing a hormone that constricts your blood vessels. We know why that is. It's a secondary cause. But primary means we don't really know. And a lot of people have primary hypertension, and they're treated with drugs like lisinopril and losartan and all these different drugs. And that's okay, right? Because that'll lower the pressure in the blood vessels, and that's good, right?
Right, but they're just, again, suppressing the symptoms and not dealing with, like, what raised the blood pressure in the first place?
Why do you
What's
have
the cause?
high blood pressure? And it doesn't matter because it's primary, right?
Yeah.
We can treat it, and the blood pressure is lower, and everybody's happy, and the insurance company pays, and looks good for everybody, and nobody gets a stroke or a heart attack. And
this is the piece I'm talking about. Like, we talk about, shadow work in our individual work. Well, there's shadow work to be done within the entire medicine community.
Yeah.
There's a lot of bad things going on. There's a ton of great stuff, mostly great stuff, but there are some bad things going on that need to be addressed. And like you said, like the light and the dark, those practicing in the light need to have the courage to also go at least examine the shadow side. Go see, like, what is being done here, because you can't turn a blind eye to it. You can't just ignore it, because it's going to continue. And so you have to have the courage to turn towards it and address it with courage, even though it's scary, even though it has the potential to change the profession forever. Hopefully, if we can integrate the light and the dark together. But I don't know why I'm getting stuck on these Star Wars metaphors up in my head, like the light and the dark, and how, like, the dark side of the Force was defeated by those Jedi from the light side extending their hand,
the love,
to the dark side and saying,
benevolence.
Yeah, we welcome.
We will not fall into hatred.
Exactly. You can strike me down right now, and I still love you. I embrace the shadow as being a part of this entire force, this entire consciousness.
Yeah.
Right? So yeah, that's what really I was asking about, was like, that shadow side of medicine and what you see in there. I know within medicine circles and talks that my wife and I go to, we consistently bring up sexual transgressions and things that inappropriate things that happen in medicine work.
And by medicine work, you mean psychedelic medicine work?
All medicine work.
Oh, okay.
Psychiatric medicine work, because it happens there too, right? We learn about that in our schooling, about patient, about professional privilege, right? And how we have power over, right? Just based on, so sexual misconduct happens in all these settings. And that's just one example. But also, like, overprescribing, or clinicians not doing the due diligence to collect the data needed. They're just doing 15-minute session, here's your script, get out of my office, usher in the next one, right? Because the shadow side, the moralistic part of their profession, the part that tells them I have to get as many patients in today as possible to make as much money as possible.
Yeah.
That's why I got this degree in the first place. I have to pay off this $100,000 debt, right? So I need to see as many people as possible. So I'm going to make it efficient and make it quick, right? Rather than doing the due diligence to do the work right.
Well, and I think if you're embracing the light and the dark and kind of trying to understand, much like the Jedi have for the Sith, you have to understand that the physician or the practitioner involved in the 7-minute or 15-minute appointment is under pressure from a vast system to perform in that fashion, and the entire system is ill.
From the empire.
Yeah, exactly. They're all under mind control from the empire.
Yeah.
But really, the entire system is sick, and the way that we look at illness and treating illness and compensating people for treating illness, and insurance companies reimbursing, and pharmaceutical companies making money, and pharmacies making money, the entire system is based upon some fairly flawed assumptions about the nature of illness. And I'm sure other people who are more conventionally trained MDs would just scoff at what I'm about to say, but really we need to question at a deep level what is making us ill. And I was recently working in Vermont at a federally qualified health center, and they were talking about monitoring hemoglobin A1Cs, which is how much a sugar is sticking to a red blood cell, and that's an indicator of how bad your diabetes is, and the higher that number is, the worse your diabetes is. And I said, instead of investing all this infrastructure and time and phone calls and drugs and all this stuff into like treating people's hemoglobin A1C and thereby their diabetes and all the sequelae that come from diabetes, why don't we just take sugar out of the food supply? It was like a mic drop. Like everybody just looked at me, and it was a room full of like 16 very dedicated physicians who are so passionate about what they do, and they just kind of laughed collectively out loud, like that would be great, wouldn't it? But everybody loves sugar, and we have sugar, so now we need to learn to treat this. But in reality, if there was no sugar in our food, the vast majority of diabetes type 2 that's lifestyle induced would evaporate overnight. And if you took alcohol out of the equation, a lot of the other residual diabetes would evaporate. Yes, people would still have type 1, which is an immunological response in which you don't produce insulin, and there's other reasons people develop diabetes in life, but most people get diabetes from eating too much sugar for too long of time. Mm-hmm. It's a very simple solution, right. And it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And there's all these Facebook posts about how, it's outrageous, the cost of insulin currently, and, this is an injustice in the world. Well, stop eating carbohydrates. And maybe if I had diabetes, I would look at this very differently, and I wouldn't be able to be so righteous about it. But I just feel like this is actually a really stupid thing that we are spending a lot of energy trying to treat and get rid of. But I think some enlightened being would be like, dude, the glucose and fructose molecule, just stop. What are you doing?
Just stop.
Yeah.
The solution is often simple, but difficult also.
Right. People like sugar.
Simple in concept, but difficult to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's really powerful. I think that's a good place for us to wrap it up then.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And for those of you out there listening, please, if anything, take what we've said today and just, don't take it for fact, but go out and experience these things for yourself. Go explore, whatever questions for yourself came up during this kind of listening experience. Because I know I learned a ton just from sitting across the table from you, and I'm so very blessed and grateful to have you in my life now.
That means a lot. Thank you very much.
I've only known you a couple months. I feel like we've been bonded souls for a while.
Yeah.
And we're all working towards this collective
healing,
evolution. Let's move forward, but we can't move forward unless we acknowledge and address our shadow side too.
Yeah.
Collectively and individually. So, thank you, Dustin.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
We'll have many more conversations in the future.
I look forward to it.
Okay. For all you listeners out there, I hope you liked it. Go be good to yourself. Go do some self-care. And we'll talk to you next time.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Conversations with the Mind podcast is sponsored by mindops.com. You can find us at www.mind-ops.com. We're an eclectic counseling company providing mental health and mental performance services to individuals, small and large groups, teams, businesses, military, through face-to-face sessions or at a distance using phone or confidential video chat apps. We bring a unique Buddhist Western lens and specialize in general psychotherapy for all mental difficulties, sport and performance psychology for performance enhancement,
addiction counseling for any maladaptive or destructive habits, and psychedelic integration therapy to make the most from your visionary medicine work. We are available as well for corporate workshops to address the needs of your employees' wellness.